What about subscription businesses where people keep sending a check other than SaaS?
So we've seen some of these in Europe. I mean, the big one in Europe, I think, is a company called Graze. They sell you a snack I think it's a weekly basis. It might be a monthly basis, and it's like nuts and fruits. I'm clearly not the target market, but there is a target market that wants to eat healthy. They don't want to eat lunch, and they want to get a snack pack that comes in over the mail. And Graze,
and they don't want to go to their local grocery store to buy the snacks?
Yeah, the trouble is, you got to buy a box full of nuts and a box full of raisins and a box full of trail mix, and it's just not as convenient. And there is some merit towards having convenience, right? I think people these days pay more for convenience than they do for actual value if the convenience is truly something they want.
So when you look at a business like that, you've talked about some of the key metrics. You need to figure out what it costs you to get a customer, and then you need to figure out how quickly that customer pays back that cost. What kind of numbers do you look for to know you have something that's kind of clicking?
So I would say the average bar is probably at least 3 months of customer sign up should pay back your customer acquisition cost. The really great businesses pay back their customer acquisition cost on the first order, which means, because it's a cash flow issue, right? Because you take this money, you spend it on marketing, you then acquire a customer. If it takes you kind of 3 months before you kind of get the money back in the bank, so you can then go off and get another customer. Unless you have a war chest of capital, you've got to make that customer pay back his customer acquisition cost, his positive contribution margin, so you can acquire the next customer. If you can do it on the first order, that's fantastic. Yeah. The danger with the first order is the first order might be the only order. So it has to be a first order, but then it has to be a series of ongoing orders as well. And a lot of that stuff is dependent on how big that order is, how big the margin is, what the recurrence rate is really going to be. But I think generally, 3 to 6 months of customer acquisition payback, if you have a war chest behind you, is reasonable. Target? Yeah. If you're a young company, it's not so reasonable, right? Because if you have a small amount of money, you spend it, and you've got to wait 3 months, 6 months before you get that money back, you can't really grow very fast because you're constrained by your capital. And that, to be fair, those kinds of businesses are really good to get investment for because you understand the mechanics, and that's where capital can really unlock growth. You're not taking any real risk in the business apart from the growth.
Yep. So for an entrepreneur who wants to start one of those kinds of businesses, if they can find a way to get enough margin on order number one so that they don't need capital, and then that customer comes back, they can show that customer comes back as they begin to read the cohort data over time, then how quickly should a business like that come and say, gee, maybe it's time for outside capital?
Yeah, so I think there are two things. So the first is the industry rule of thumb is, and a lot of these businesses are marketplace businesses, right, where they're attracting customers and coming in. I think a lot of marketplaces start with about 15% of margin, right? Because they're acting literally as a middleman in many ways, right? They're getting people to come through the door and buy something and taking a commission. 15 is usually a little too low. If you're in the 20s, you're a lot better. If you're doing anything above 20s, you're in spectacular territory. It's very hard to get above 25%, but because that gives you the capital to be able to pay for the customer acquisition. Then the question is, how quickly can you scale? And this is where it's a little bit tricky again. What tends to work in small numbers, you're spending £100 a day on Google, may not work when you start spending £10,000 a day on Google.
So you have to dip deeper into the
because you get decreasing, decreasing returns, right? And with what you don't get economies of scale on advertising, you get diseconomies. It's just the nature of the business, right? You cream off the good customers, and then it's the bad customers that are coming in through the door. So what you really have to show to an investor that this is a linear model. Probably not going to be a non-linear model just given the nature of it. It can be linear, so in other words, you can keep getting cream. But in order to do that, you have to show that you can, the only way to prove this is to spend. The problem is not many people have the ability so what you have to do then, and it's an exercise for the entrepreneur more than it is for the investor, because you have to convincingly be able to demonstrate this. What we found is people will take very high sums of money in very concentrated amounts of time and show if they're spending £100 a day, they're going to spend £1,000, but just for 1 hour. So they're not going to waste a ton. And by then they can they can extrapolate and say, look, we normally spend 100, but if I spent 1,000 in an hour, everything held pretty close. If I then spent it for 12 hours because I had the capital to build, obviously can't do that because I'm a small company. But look, the numbers kind of hold up. So this will scale linearly. And I may get diminishing returns, but I won't get diminishing returns today. I'll get them maybe a year or two from now.
Yep.
Then you can kind of get people over the line. But that's the hard part. So, and then the minute you can show that that is definitively true, and with all, by the way, with venture financing, there is no definitively true. There's a hypothesis,
yeah, right.
and you need someone to believe, right? If every single person, including the great firms, if every single person said yes to everything, the world would be a very different place. Yeah. Even the Airbnbs of the world get turned down by very good firms. Yeah. So you need someone to believe that there is a hypothesis that it holds up at scale. And to some degree, the ones that work really well in marketplaces are increasing returns. The marketplace itself becomes more valuable and becomes more of an engine to attract both the customers as well as the suppliers, and the machine just works. In Uber and Airbnb, et cetera, are kind of examples of that. But you won't be able to prove that unless you have the money to be able to spend to get both sides.
Yeah. What about pay in advance models where it's a B2B kind of sale? Do you do any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we do, and we try and encourage our entrepreneurs to think this way, and it's really hard going. So, you know, I have one, it's a churn management software company. So it's an enterprise software company that helps you figure out which of your customers are going to churn, does it very accurately, it's like 95% accurate. It basically uses your social network to figure out if you have 3, 4, 5 friends who've churned off a service, you're very likely to churn off. Friends tend to behave the same way, it's statistically true. So they've been talking to customers, and I tell them, go off and tell the customers to even use my software, you've got to pay me $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 worth of professional services. I won't even install the software for you unless you pay me up front. This is, by the way, great for cash flow, right? Because you get this money up front, and then you charge your customers for the service. It takes a little bit of conviction, a little bit of courage to go to a customer and say, my software is so good, just to be able to have the right to use it, you're going to have to pay me. And entrepreneurs are shy at asking for it, but the ones who are not shy, so again, we have a couple of companies who are not shy, you know, this is what it's going to cost you. You know, you want to get my product is excellent. Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll give you a refund. In 30 days, if my stuff doesn't work, I'll send you a check right back. You know, I will refund you all your money. But it takes a high degree, and this is what I mean by selling, right? So your product has to work at that point, and you have to have a lot of courage to go in the door. But you can make it very low risk to no risk for the customer, especially if it works. But asking for that upfront check, we find people they're shy. They don't like asking for money.
So how do we get over that psychological barrier?
You've got to do it once or twice, and you know, you do it once or twice. Yeah. So the same entrepreneur who I've been saying this for like 8 months now. You know, they just asked for, I think they're talking a very large sports company. They produce shows and put them online. It's one of the major leagues in the U.S. And they asked for a $200,000 check, and the customer balked. And just to get into business, $200,000 to use me. They have a big churn problem for this one. They broadcast shows online, but the guy's willing to pay $25,000. You know, so there's now 25 is probably not the right number.
It's the beginning of a conversation.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. So I think now that they've realized by asking, you don't get shown the door. You know, you have a conversation saying, you know, maybe this isn't the right price for me. Let's talk, and you'll find a happy medium. But if you can get that cash up front, it's huge from a working capital perspective. You don't need financing at that point. Yeah. You build your business based on your customers. Very difficult to do, mostly because the model's not seen.
Hussein, one of the very interesting companies in your portfolio is Deliveroo. Would you tell a bit of that story?